Greetings yet again to baristas. I'm going to comment on a theme I've touched on before, which is the Israeli occupation of Palestinian lands. Some of you will be quick to point out that Israel itself is built in occupied territory and that there is no real distinction. What might surprise you is that the State of Israel really agrees with you. As most students of the region know, the term Nakba is an Arabic term for great tragedy and has been employed by Palestinian activists in the same manner as Jews use the term Shoah for the Holocaust. The Nakba was the ethnic cleansing of Palestine of its Arab majority before it could be realistically turned into the Jewish state of Israel. Around 800,000 Arabs were driven from their homes, villages, and fields at gunpoint, or the threat of it, to refugee camps in surrounding countries that are still in existence as mass homeless shelters. Those who fled and attempted to return are still called infiltrators under Israeli law and subject to detention as terrorists, even if they pick a stray orange from a surviving tree on former family land. There are two things about this narrative. One is that it is officially denied by the Israeli state, its spokespersons, and apologists. According to them, the Arabs willingly fled, or ordered to do so, by their leaders in Palestine and in the Arab League in order to wait out the invasion and liquidation of Israel in safety, and then return after the Jews had been driven into the sea. This convenient narrative has been thoroughly blasted out of the water, or any other natural element of truth, by Israeli historians like Ilan Pappé and Benny Morris, who have brought forth the incontrovertible documentation proving the ethnic cleansing of the Arab population in what was to become the State of Israel was exactly that, premeditated and logically executed. But a second, and maybe more important point, is that this process was preceded by 30 years of sustained pressure, whose ultimate goal was the same: the exclusive Judaization of the British Palestine Mandate into a Jewish state. This low-key approach was necessitated by the strictures of British control and relied on continuous immigration and land purchase. By squeezing Arabs out of the economy of immigrant areas and buying as much land as possible from absentee Arab landlords out for a quick pound, the Yishuv, the Jewish community of colonial Palestine, hoped to create an Arab-Bahrain land for its own exclusive possession and use. The removal of the befuddled British also removed the only constraints on full-scale tribal war between Jew and Arab. The British had been badly burned by the Arab revolt of a decade before, and now the Jews were uprising. But rather than endure this a second time, the British bailed to let both sides slaughter one another, if so inclined, than their own Tommies. Now Ben-Gurion and the Zionist leadership and its military formations found their hands unshackled, and also finding arms, could complete their transformation of Palestine into Israel by revolutionary direct action over evolutionary reform. And so things stayed until 1967, when Jordan abandoned its 1948 conquest of the West Bank. Israel moved in to fill the vacuum all the way to the Wailing Wall of Jerusalem. This was a bone thrown to the Israeli army to protect the core of the Hashemite kingdom, but I suspect it was done with sly, malicious purpose as well, a bone that would, King Hussein hoped, choke Israel in the throat as it tried to swallow and digest it. Because now Israel had a dilemma: to protect this territory as another Palestinian mandate, to rule it as the British, or to transform it into a part of Eretz, or Greater Israel. After the rise of the Likud party in the 1970s, the latter course has become de facto state policy. The Drang-Nach-Osten of direct dispossession and settlement that began in 1948 is to be completed all the way to the River Jordan. But Netanyahu and his cohorts have a dilemma. This is not 1948. A rehash of the original Nakba is not possible without a second war of equal proportion, one that would now destroy Israel itself. The solution is to wage a cold Nakba. This means returning to the step-by-step approach of immigration and squeezing, as in the first 30 years of the old mandate. But it also means more, because state and military power are now in the hands of a Jewish state. If a hot Nakba is not possible, the slow, patient grind of due process is also unnecessary. Netanyahu's trick, and that of Israeli Hasbara, or propaganda in general, is to flood the new Palestine mandate with immigrants, justify continued occupation and repression for the safety of these settlers, in order to quarantine the Palestinian population behind the walls of an Arab ghetto. By constant violent humiliation, refusal of employment, denial of basic human services above the minimum to continue life, if only for appearance's sake, Israel wants to make their continued existence so painful and problematic that the Arabs will voluntarily pack up and flee, if not en masse as in 1948, then family by family by family over the coming decade until there's not enough left to keep their community intact as a viable entity worth recognizing. To do this, and get away with it, requires the peaceful maintenance of the repressive status quo, and thus you now know what peace means to the Israeli government, and why the U.S. participation in a pro-Israel peace process is a sucker's game. This is all apparent to anyone familiar with the on-the-ground reality, including Israel's own officials. I strongly suspect that the American negotiating partners also know this, but to maintain the public fiction of a peace process, they must go along with the deception to bamboozle cooperation from the American public, which is naive enough to believe in a peace process for its own sake and the sincerity of Washington and Jerusalem. Which brings us to the question of what's to be done about it. The cold Nakba is hiding behind a peace process as Hitler hid his genocidal intentions under the cover of a general war. So, how can one respond if war is impossible and unthinkable and peace is a trap for the unendurable? Step one is to recognize these things for what they are. Building on that, the Palestinian state should echo Israeli national policy. Make all those born in, or with historic roots in the former British Mandate Palestine, citizens of the current Palestinian Authority, whether they now reside there or not. Step 3 is to win such recognition globally. To do so gives them a claim against the Israeli state, again whether on the ground of Palestine or not. This would mean the right to sue Israel in international venues for lost lands, homes, crops, businesses, or lives under its occupation. Courts so ruling would have the right to attach Israeli assets in their jurisdiction as indemnity. Even if Israel were to win the second cold Nakba, it would find the cost of its victory as onerous as a straight-out defeat. Uh-oh, someone on the YouTube line again. Who can it be now? Hello? Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister himself. Hey, boo-boo, what's in your picnic basket? Just that I'm ignoring the existential threat to the Jewish people by these poor little victims I'm bleeding for? That if you didn't keep these vermin in their cage, they'd eat you all alive in a second Holocaust and then come for me. Well, aside from the Nazi language and mentality, there's a problem with your conception. Spokesmen for these people, the ones that threaten your existence and such, have acknowledged the Shoah. They don't deny it, nor call for its repetition, like the president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani. Last year he said, the Nazis carried out a massacre that cannot be denied, especially against the Jewish people. But yet you turned right around and denied his acceptance of the Holocaust as a historic fact. Why, boo-boo? Because it's too inconvenient for you? And then there was Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who just a few days ago acknowledged the Holocaust as the most heinous crime to have occurred against humanity in the modern era. Well, sounds like full acceptance to me and anyone else. But you said it didn't matter. Because he's a Palestinian? Because he has relations with Hamas, which denies the Holocaust, and therefore he's a denier too, no matter what he actually says. So, it's not an issue of their denial, it's one of them being good enough to have their acceptance accepted by you. It looks boo-boo like you're a double denier, that the Nakba ever happened, and a denier of Holocaust acceptance. Because you're thriving on hatred and violence, and you need to project it to justify your own. Without this brainwashing, neither the Israeli masses nor the larger world can continue condoning your state's endless war with its neighbors, nor driving the Palestinians out step by step, nor the daily bloody grind of your regime's repression. Just like Orwell, war is peace and acceptance is denial. Hasn't the 20th century taught you anything, Professor Boo Boo? Regimes built on bullshit drive themselves into the ground.